The Door That Bleeds. Chapter 1. The Knock at Midnight. It started, as most horrors do, with something deceptively simple: a knock. Soft, deliberate, and chillingly out of place. The clock had just struck midnight when the first knock echoed through the hollow corridors of the Harlow house. Elijah, alone and half asleep on the living room couch, jolted upright. He stared at the front door. No one should have been out in that storm. No one could have made it up the muddy hill, not without slipping. He waited, holding his breath. Another knock came, this one slower, heavier, like knuckles dragging across rotting wood. The old house groaned under the pressure of the wind, but the sound wasn't the wind. It was purposeful. Elijah reached for the flashlight on the table. The power had gone out an hour ago. The beam flickered as he moved toward the door, each step a negotiation between curiosity and dread. Rain lashed against the windows, and the silence between the knocks was louder than the storm. "Who's there?" he called, voice shaking. No answer. He peeked through the peephole. Nothing. But when he turned the lock and cracked the door open, his heart dropped. There were no footprints in the mud, nothing but a single crimson handprint smeared across the wood. Fresh, dripping, impossibly warm. The door suddenly slammed shut on its own, nearly crushing his fingers. Elijah stumbled back, trembling. The knock came again, this time from inside the house. Chapter 2. Whispers Behind the Wood. Elijah didn't sleep that night. He sat upright on the couch, flashlight in hand, its beam pointed at the front door, the same one that now bore a blood-red print that hadn't faded, hadn't dried. Every few minutes he thought he heard something, creaking from upstairs, a faint scratching behind the walls, the low hum of a voice he couldn't place. By dawn, the storm had passed but left the sky overcast and dull. Elijah walked over to the door again. The crimson handprint remained, untouched by the wind or rain. He took a picture of it with his phone, then reached to wipe it away with a towel. It smeared, not dried paint, not mud. It smelled faintly of iron. Something wasn't right. He decided to check the basement. If someone had gotten into the house, they could be hiding down there. He grabbed a rusted crowbar from the shed outside, then slowly made his way down the creaking wooden steps. The basement smelled like old paper and mildew. The walls were lined with rotting shelves and cardboard boxes. Nothing seemed disturbed. Nothing except a section of wood paneling on the far wall that looked newer than the rest. Elisha approached it, his breath catching as he heard something, a whisper, faint and soft like someone breathing out syllables. He froze, trying to make it out. "Elijah, help me." His blood ran cold. He backed away slowly, then dropped the crowbar as the whisper came again, clearer this time. "Elijah, don't open it." He stared at the panel. There was no gap, no seams, but he knew something was behind it, a presence, a pressure, the kind you feel just before something terrible happens. Suddenly, the light bulb above him popped, plunging the basement into darkness, and in that moment, he heard it again, the same knock from last night, but this time from the other side of the wall. 3 slow, deliberate knocks, and then silence. Chapter 3. the red stain that grew. By the next morning, the crimson handprint was no longer confined to the front door. It had spread. Elijah awoke to the sound of his phone buzzing. He had fallen asleep on the couch again, flashlight dead in his lap. A text from his sister June lit up the screen. "Coming by later today. Need to talk." He sat up, stretching stiff muscles, but then his eyes caught something that made him freeze. A streak of red ran along the floorboards, a trail leading from the door to the hallway. At first glance, it looked like someone had spilled paint, but when Elijah leaned closer, the thick, viscous texture told a different story. Blood, still fresh, still warm. He followed the trail cautiously, heart pounding, breath shallow. It curved toward the stairs, then vanished halfway up, as if it had soaked into the wood itself. But when he reached the landing, another surprise waited. A second handprint, this time on the hallway wall, just beside the door to his childhood bedroom. The stain wasn't just red now. It pulsed faintly, as if alive. Elijah reached out, but stopped himself just short of touching it. He had the distinct sense that if he did, it would pull him in. Instead, he opened the bedroom door. Nothing had changed. The bed was still made, the posters from a decade ago still hung on the walls, faded and curling at the edges. But there was a smell. Coppery, earthy, like something buried. Something wrong. He turned to leave, but then he saw it. Carved into the wooden back of the door, so faint he nearly missed it. "You opened it." His knees nearly gave out. A voice, real, from downstairs. He raced down and found June standing in the open doorway, one eyebrow raised. "You look like hell," she said. "You shouldn't be here," he managed. But she had already stepped inside. Behind her, unnoticed, the front door slowly began to drip again. The stain was growing. Chapter 4. Eyes Through the Keyhole. June paced the living room while Elijah tried to explain. He told her about the knock, the whispering wall, the red stain that wouldn't dry. But the more he spoke, the more her face tightened with disbelief. "Elijah, you've barely slept," she said. "This house always freaked us out as kids. Maybe it's just..." She didn't finish her sentence. Her eyes had drifted to the front door. The blood was thicker now. Not just smeared, but beading, forming small droplets that oozed downward like tears. "Okay, that's not normal," she admitted. They spent the afternoon trying to act like things were fine. They made coffee, they sat in silence, they avoided talking about the door. But as the sun began to set, Elijah noticed something new. The house had grown quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that makes your ears ring. Even the birds outside had stopped chirping. June went upstairs to lie down. Elijah wandered the hallway, drawn to his parents' old bedroom, a place he hadn't entered in years. The doorknob was cold to the touch. Inside, dust coated every surface, and the curtains fluttered despite the windows being shut. As he turned to leave, something made him pause. A faint rustling, then a whisper. He dropped to his knees and pressed his eye to the old brass keyhole. At first, all he saw was darkness. Then, a blink. A pair of eyes stared back at him. He jerked back, heart racing. There was no one in the room. But when he looked again, the eyes were still there, closer now, watching. "Elijah," a voice whispered from the other side. The door began to rattle. "Elijah," it repeated, more desperate. He stood frozen, unable to breathe, until June's scream echoed from upstairs. He bolted out of the room and up the stairs. June stood by the bathroom, pale and shaking, pointing at the mirror. On the fogged glass, a message had been written in streaks of red. "Stop looking." Chapter 5. When the door screamed. Night came like a curtain of dread over the Harlow house. The temperature dropped suddenly, unnaturally, as if the air itself was afraid to stay. Elijah and June sat close in the living room, neither speaking, both waiting for something they couldn't name. The front door, the bleeding one, had changed, not just in appearance, but in presence. It pulsed now, its surface twitching ever so slightly like muscle beneath skin. The stain had formed a shape, a twisted version of a face, mouth wide as if eternally screaming. "We have to leave," June whispered. "We can't," Elijah said. "It won't let us." "What do you mean?" "I tried earlier. I opened the door, it was just black. Not night, not storm, just black, like the world outside was gone." They both turned as a loud creak echoed from upstairs, then another. Footsteps, slow, heavy. Elijah stood, grabbing the crowbar again. "Stay here." He moved toward the staircase, heart hammering. But before he could take the first step, the door behind him let out a sound so piercing, so raw, it brought him to his knees. A scream. Not like a human scream, but something deeper, older. The house vibrated with it. Windows rattled. Lights flickered. June fell to the ground, covering her ears, sobbing. "Make it stop, Elijah. Make it stop." But he couldn't. The sound wasn't coming from a speaker or a voice. It came from the door itself. It was alive. And then, silence. Too much silence. When Elijah looked up, the door was wide open. The stain was gone. But in its place stood a figure, pale and wet, with hollow eyes and a smile carved too wide. "Elijah," it whispered, voice like cracking wood. And the door slammed shut behind it. Chapter 6. The room that wasn't there. Elijah didn't remember the hallway being that long. He stood upstairs, staring at what looked like a new door. It was at the end of the hallway, but the hallway had never had an end before. It had always turned left into the attic stairwell. And yet here it was. A narrow stretch of dimly lit floorboards leading straight into a wooden door they'd never seen before. "Elijah," June said, her voice low and sharp, "that wasn't there yesterday." "I know." They approached it slowly. The door looked old, older than the rest of the house. Its surface was warped and damp, almost breathing. There was no doorknob, just a keyhole, but not like the ones in the rest of the house. This one was shaped like an eye. He knelt to look through it. Nothing, just shifting shadows and the faint sound of dripping water. "We're not going in there," June said. "You know that, right?" But the door opened on its own. The room beyond was cold, colder than the winter air outside. The floor was black marble, slick with something that shimmered like oil. The walls weren't walls, they were mirrors. Dozens of them, all cracked, all showing different reflections. Elijah stepped in, unable to resist. His reflection didn't follow him. Each mirror played a different scene, not of the past, not of the future, but of something else, something impossible. One showed him standing in the woods covered in blood. Another showed June alone in the house, screaming, the front door open and weeping. "Elijah, we need to leave." June's voice snapped him out of it. "Now!" But the door had vanished. Where it had once been, there was only a mirror. In it, Elijah saw himself again. Only this version smiled and blinked. "Let me in," the reflection mouthed. The air pulsed, the floor cracked, and suddenly they were back. In the hallway, the room behind them was gone. No door, no trace, except a single note on the floor. You were never supposed to see that. Chapter 7. Cracks in the Silence. The air in the house had changed again. It wasn't just heavy, it was fractured, as if sound itself was breaking apart. Elijah noticed it first when he tried to call out to June and his voice didn't echo. The walls didn't carry sound anymore. They absorbed it. "June," he called again. Nothing came back. Not even his own footsteps made noise now. It was like walking through a vacuum. He found her in the dining room, staring at the chandelier. The crystal pieces were swaying violently, but no sound rang out. Not the clinking of glass, not the creaking of the chain. Just dead, deafening silence. "I can't hear anything," June said, not turning toward him. "I tried screaming. Nothing came out." Elijah tried to say something but froze when he saw her face. A thin line of blood trickled from her ear. A hairline crack split the ceiling above them. Then another on the wall, and another across the floor. They were spreading. "Elijah, we have to get out of the house," June whispered. He nodded. They ran to the front door, but it was gone. In its place, a solid wall of wooden slats, old and warped, bleeding slowly from the center. The house was changing, sealing itself in. Behind them, the cracks widened. Splinters formed across furniture, picture frames, even the windows. Still, not a single sound. And then a voice, just one. "Elijah." It came from beneath the floorboards. "Elijah, don't listen." He dropped to his knees, placing his ear to the wood. Something was crawling beneath. Something trying to speak. Then came a whisper, faint but clear. "You're cracking too." Chapter 8. The voice that called my name. The house no longer followed the logic of the world outside. Corridors twisted, doors led to rooms that shouldn't exist, and everywhere the silence was only ever broken by a single sound. A voice that called Elijah's name. Sometimes it was soft, like the whisper of a mother waking her child. Other times it came sharp and urgent, almost frantic. No matter how fast Elijah turned, the voice always came from just behind him, just out of sight. And it was always the same voice, familiar but distorted, like someone he used to know but couldn't quite place. June was starting to slip. She'd stopped talking. She stood in front of mirrors now, staring into them like they held answers she couldn't reach. Elijah tried to shake her, to pull her out of it, but her eyes remained vacant. "I hear it too," she whispered once, "but it says my name wrong." Elijah roamed the house again, desperate for something to make sense. The front door, or where it had once been, was now gone entirely, replaced with a warped wall of dark wood. Still warm, still bleeding. The voice grew louder. That night, Elijah woke to find himself standing at the basement door with no memory of walking there. His hand was already on the knob. The whisper came again. "Elijah, please. I'm still down here." It was his mother's voice, but she had died in that house 12 years ago. His hands trembled as he descended the steps. The air grew colder with every stair. Shadows swam across the walls, even though no light moved. He reached the bottom. The whisper was louder now, coming from behind the panel, the one that didn't belong. But this time, there was a crack in it. A small gap he could finally see through. "Elijah," the voice sobbed. "You left me here." Through the crack, a pale eye stared back. "I never stopped calling your name." Chapter 9. A Handle That Never Turns. Elijah spent the next day walking in circles. Every room shifted when he left it. No matter where he turned, the house was no longer a house. It was a maze made of memories and things that shouldn't be. He found June sitting on the staircase, motionless, eyes wide. She didn't speak when he called her name. Her lips moved, but no sound emerged. It was like her voice had been taken. There was one door Elijah hadn't tried yet, not out of forgetfulness, but fear. The attic. When they were kids, their mother had warned them about it. "Some doors aren't meant to be opened," she would whisper, especially on stormy nights. Elijah never understood what she meant, until now. The attic door stood at the top of the second floor, untouched by time. The handle, though, was strange, smooth, dark, like bone polished over decades. Elijah reached for it. It had moved. He pulled harder, twisted, slammed his fist into it. Nothing. The handle wouldn't turn, not even a wiggle. But there was a vibration beneath it, like a heartbeat. He placed his forehead to the door. Something breathed on the other side. "Elijah," it whispered again. He stepped back and stared. Carved into the frame were dozens of names. His, June's, their mother's, their father's. All etched deeply into the wood, like someone had clawed them there. He grabbed a nail from the nearby windowsill and jammed it into the space between the door and frame, trying to pry it open. As soon as the metal touched the wood, it burned his hand. Smoke rose from his skin. "Elijah, don't," came a voice from behind. It was June, but she wasn't looking at him. Her eyes were fixed on the door. "It's not a door," she whispered. "It's a mouth." And slowly, ever so slowly, the handle turned on its own. Chapter 10. Blood Beneath the Floorboards. The floor creaked with every step. But it wasn't just old wood groaning, it was something alive beneath it. Elijah had started to hear it regularly now. A low gurgling, a wet shuffle just beneath his feet. The house was breathing through its foundation. He and June had taken refuge in the kitchen, the last room that hadn't shifted into something else, for now. The refrigerator hummed, but the rest of the appliances had gone cold. June sat at the table, her eyes glassy, her hands gripping a photo of their family that had somehow reappeared, unstained, on the counter. "Elijah," she whispered, "look." At first he saw nothing. Then he noticed the dark spot spreading under the kitchen tiles. It started as a single black circle, then slowly expanded, veins of red seeping outward. He bent down and pried one of the tiles loose with the crowbar. A foul stench hit him instantly, metallic, damp, and earthy. Below the tile was a cavity filled with liquid, blood, thick, dark, and moving, as if stirred from within. Something inside slithered. He dropped the crowbar, stumbling back. June stood, her voice shaking. "It's underneath the whole house, isn't it?" He nodded, eyes wide. "It's feeding." The lights above flickered violently. The house let out a long, low groan. Then the floor burst open beneath them. Elijah grabbed June just in time, pulling her back as a gaping hole formed in the kitchen. From its depths rose a figure, not fully formed, its face bloated and smooth like wax, its limbs twitching unnaturally. It stared without eyes. "Elijah," it rasped. He knew that voice. It belonged to his father, who had vanished when Elijah was 13, swallowed by this very house. "You buried me here," it moaned. "Now it wants more." And the floor began to crack beneath them again. Chapter 11. The mirror showed the truth. After sealing off the kitchen with furniture and whatever broken planks they could find, Elijah and June retreated upstairs. The house seemed to groan louder now, as if irritated by their defiance. The walls pulsed. The air itself hummed. They barricaded themselves in the hallway bathroom, for now it felt like the only place that hadn't changed. But Elijah could sense it wouldn't last. Nothing did in this house. June sat by the sink, staring at her reflection. Elijah had tried not to look in the mirror since the day he saw the writing, but she seemed drawn to it, like it had something more to say. "Elijah," she said softly, "it's showing me things that didn't happen, or haven't, or did, but not to us." He stepped beside her, hesitant. The mirror reflected them both, but the versions it showed weren't quite right. Elijah's reflection looked thinner, sunken eyes, pale skin. June's reflection stood behind him, her hands on his shoulders, but June hadn't moved. The glass fogged. Then a message appeared, letter by letter. "Truth comes in pieces." Suddenly, the bathroom lights flickered and burst. In the strobe of final flashes, the mirror changed. It no longer showed them, it showed a room. The living room, where their parents sat on the couch. But it wasn't real. Their mother was weeping. Their father was covered in blood. The TV was on, playing a distorted version of a home video Elijah didn't remember filming. He reached toward the mirror. His hand passed through it. "Elijah, no!" June shouted. But it was too late. The mirror pulled him through. He fell hard, but not onto tile, onto carpet. He was in the living room, but everything was off, darker, older, twisted. He looked around. The air was heavy, humid, and in the corner of the room the same pale figure from before stood smiling, watching. "Elijah," it said, "now you see." And all the mirrors in the room began to crack. each one showing him dying in a different way. Chapter 12. The Door That Followed Me. Elijah wasn't sure how he got back. One second he was trapped in the mirror living room, the next he was on the bathroom floor, gasping like someone pulled from deep water. June knelt beside him, her voice distant, her face blurred. But everything had changed. Everywhere he turned now, there was a door. In the hallway, a door that hadn't been there yesterday. In the kitchen, a door pulsing faintly behind the refrigerator. Even in the basement, the panel had grown taller, stretched like it was becoming a doorway too. And they all looked the same. Warped wood, bleeding edges, and no handles. "Elijah," June whispered, "they're following you." He didn't respond. His hands were shaking. His clothes were damp with sweat, or maybe the blood that seemed to weep from the cracks in the floor. He walked into the living room. The original door, the first one, was gone. In its place stood another. "Elijah?" The voice came from behind it. He moved toward it instinctively, but June grabbed his arm. "No, every time you open one, it gets stronger." "I didn't open it," he whispered. "It opened me." She stared at him, confused. And then they both heard it. The creaking of hinges, the slow exhale of air, and in the mirror on the wall, they watched as every door in the house opened at once. From each, something stepped out. Not identical, but connected. Like fragments of the same being. Faces twisted into smiles that didn't match their eyes. Hands too long. Feet that hovered above the ground. "Elijah," they all said in perfect unison. "You brought us home." Chapter 13. I Dreamt of the Bleeding Door. Elijah hadn't slept in days, but now he dreamed, or thought he did. The line between waking and sleeping had blurred like everything else in the house. In this dream, he stood at the top of the stairs, looking down into a void where the living room had been. And there it was, the bleeding door. But it was no longer attached to anything. It floated, suspended in the darkness, dripping steadily onto nothing. The blood vanished into the black, swallowed by something that hungered beneath it. He couldn't look away. "Elijah?" a voice called softly from behind. He turned and saw June. But not June. Her eyes were all wrong. Deep, endless, like pits dug too far. She pointed to the door. "You have to open it. It's the only way to wake up." He stepped closer. The door throbbed like it had a pulse. As he reached for the handle, now returned, the wood cracked beneath his fingers. Blood seeped from the keyhole, thick and hot. "Open it," June said again, her voice layered, not one but many voices stacked on top of each other. He opened it. 1,000 screams poured out, but none were loud. They were hushed, buried, desperate. He saw flashes, his mother sobbing, his father clawing at the floor, June disappearing into the wall, and himself already on the other side. He fell forward through the threshold, but the fall didn't end. He plummeted through layers of the house, versions he didn't recognize. One room was upside down with furniture clinging to the ceiling like barnacles. Another was underwater, but he could still breathe. In one, he watched himself from a distance, asleep, eyes twitching beneath fluttering lids, while something dark hovered above him. He kept falling, through whispers, through faces he once knew twisted into mockeries, through door after door, all bleeding, all open. Then he hit the floor. He gasped, coughing up dark water. He was in his childhood bedroom, but it was wrong. Too clean, too new. His toys were back, his drawings on the walls, but everything was still, frozen, and on the bed sat June, a child again. "Elijah," she said, "we were never meant to leave." He tried to speak, but his throat burned. She pointed past him. The bleeding door now stood in the middle of the room. He turned toward it, ready, and then Elijah woke, but the room was wrong again. The ceiling was too high. The walls were covered in doors. None had handles, except one, and it was already open. Chapter 14. The House That Fed on Fear. The walls breathed. Elijah could hear it now, not the house creaking or groaning like before, but actual breaths. Inhales that sounded like wind dragging across broken glass, and exhales that carried sobs. It wasn't just the bleeding doors anymore. The entire house was alive. June clutched his arm as they wandered through what used to be the dining room. The table was gone, so were the chairs. In their place stood pillars of wood shaped like twisted figures, faces frozen in horror, mouths wide, eyes hollow. "I think it's showing us the others," June whispered. "The ones who came before us." Elijah nodded, but he couldn't speak. His throat was dry, the air thick with the metallic taste of blood and something sour like spoiled meat. With every step, the house seemed to grow hungrier, feeding off their fear, their memories, their pain. As they passed through the hallway, Elijah noticed the photographs on the wall had changed. They no longer showed their family. Instead, they showed Elijah and June, but in places they'd never been. Forests soaked in red, fields of bones, black staircases that led nowhere, and always in the background, the door. They stopped in front of the basement again. The panel was now fully a door, tall, looming, pulsing. It whispered to them, not with words, but with memories. Their mother screaming, their father vanishing, Elijah hiding, June crying. "Elijah," June said, barely audible, "it doesn't just want us to be afraid. It needs us to be." "I know," he said, "because that's what feeds it." The lights in the house dimmed. All at once, the shadows turned toward them. From every mirror, reflection, and frame, the same phrase appeared, etched, scrawled, screamed. "Feed me." And the floor beneath their feet began to melt. They stumbled back as the floor liquefied beneath them. Blood and rot seeped between the floorboards, curling upward in steam. The hallway groaned, stretching like sinew torn from bone. The house was no longer just alive. It was awakening. "Elijah, it's changing everything," June shouted, gripping the wall for balance. Her fingers left dents in the wallpaper, which pulsed in return like irritated skin. The house buckled. Furniture collapsed in on itself. Doors swung open and shut violently, screaming wood grinding against hinges. And then the whispers began again, Not one, but hundreds. Names, dates, confessions, cries. They came from the walls, the ceiling, even the floor. They ran hand in hand down the corridor, but it stretched before them like elastic. No matter how fast they moved, the staircase remained distant, unreachable. Behind them, the wooden statues moved, slowly but surely, eyes glowing, fingers twitching. The house did not want them to leave. It wanted to consume them. "Elijah!" June cried again, stumbling. He grabbed her just as the floor began to pulse beneath them, a heartbeat, slow, heavy. The house no longer fed on fear alone. Now it wanted everything. Chapter 15. The day I opened it, Elijah stood in front of the door, the first one, the only one. It had returned to where it started, the front of the house, but this time it was different. It didn't bleed, it breathed. Its wood expanded and contracted as if lungs pressed beneath the grain. The stain was gone, but the sense of dread remained, magnified. It was no longer trying to scare him, it had already won. June was gone. She had vanished when the house melted, swallowed whole by the darkness beneath the floor. Elijah had tried to hold on, but she slipped through his arms like smoke. Her scream still echoed in his head. He stood alone now, the house quiet, the mirrors cracked and blackened. The walls no longer pulsed, they simply watched. And the door waited. He took a step forward. "Elijah!" 1,000 voices whispered from within. He hesitated, hand outstretched. Every memory of pain, terror, and love flickered behind his eyes. His mother's lullaby, his father's final words, June's last glance before she disappeared. He didn't open the door because he had no choice. He opened it because he finally understood. It wasn't about escaping. It was about becoming part of it. The door swung open with no sound, no scream, no blood, just light, dim, flickering, and endless. Elijah stepped through. At first, there was only silence. Then the light dimmed, revealing a corridor lined with countless versions of himself. Each one twisted, some younger, some older, some smiling too wide or missing their eyes. They stood still, watching him. As he walked forward, they followed. The corridor narrowed until Elijah reached a final mirror. This one didn't reflect him. It showed June, not as she was, but as she had become. Heart of the house, her body tangled in roots, her face half submerged in the wall, her eyes pleading. "Ilya," she whispered, "you let it in." Tears filled his eyes. "I didn't know." "Yes, you did." He touched the mirror. The surface was soft, warm. It pulled him in, wrapping around his fingers like skin. He didn't resist. Behind him, the corridor collapsed. Ahead, the house opened like a mouth. He stepped forward, and the house sighed. The door closed and began to bleed again. Somewhere deep inside, the walls whispered a new name. Elijah.